This video will introduce you to using domains within a geodatabase to constrain the range of possible entries for an attribute. This is particularly handy in those cases where you want to enforce data integrity when you're entering information into a table or feature class. Domains are stored at the geodatabase level, but applied to individual feature or table attributes. I have my source data loaded into ArcGIS Pro. This consists of an Excel table of land use land cover codes and a feature class of land use land cover polygons. Both of these data sets are not stored inside a geodatabase, and they're part of a partially completed project, meaning that I still have some work to do. My goal is going to get these into a geodatabase and then use an attribute domain to enforce attribute integrity going forward. If we open up the attribute table of the land use land cover feature class, we see that it consists of individual polygon records, each which has a land use land cover code. This land use land cover code is nothing more than an integer value that corresponds to a particular land use land cover class. If we go into the field properties, we see that the field LULC is of the data type short, meaning short integer. Exploring my Excel table, the LULC codes, we see that it contains two fields, the LULC code, which is the LULC coded value, and then the LULC description, which is the text description for each one of those codes. Now as we move into the properties of the fields for the Excel worksheet, we see that the LULC code field has a data type of double. If I want to use this as a domain for my LULC code so I can associate each code in the feature class with the record in this table, it's going to be problematic. And it's going to be problematic because the LULC code in the feature class is of the short data type, whereas the LULC code in the Excel worksheet is of the double data type. By default, Excel stores all numeric data in the double format, but we're going to resolve this when we import the data into our geodatabase. I cannot set up and apply domains using Excel tables and Shapefile feature classes, so I'm going to need to get these data sets into my geodatabase. First, I'm going to import the Shapefile land use land cover feature class. When I'm running the feature class to feature class tool, I'm going to have some options to both give the feature class a new name and maybe even adjust the attribute fields if I so choose. Going down to the field map section, I'm going to click on the attribute field for LULC, go over to the properties, and make some minor adjustments to the alias so that I have a more meaningful description when I'm viewing this attribute table within ArcGIS. Now I have the option to adjust the data type. This is not necessary. I want to keep it as short integer, and you should be careful doing this. If you have decimal data, converting it to integer will result in the loss of information. When we look at the attribute table of the feature class after it's imported into the geodatabase, we're going to notice some changes. First of all, instead of the FID, it has an object ID. It also has the shape length, which is the perimeter, and shape area fields. These are in the units of the coordinate system of the dataset, which in this case are meters. If we look at the property of these fields, we see the key thing is that the LULC field is of the short data type. It's going to be very important when we consider applying a domain to this field. In this example, setting up a domain is really a two-step process. First, we're going to import that Excel table into the geodatabase and in the process adjust some of the data types, and then we're going to convert that table to a domain. Launching the table-to-table tool to import the Excel worksheet, I'm going to specify the specific Excel worksheet as the import rows, and the output is going to be into my geodatabase. I'm going to call the output name LULC codes, and then what's really important in this case is I'm going to go into the field map and make some adjustments to the properties of the output fields. Because I want to apply my domain to the LULC field in the feature class, it's imperative that the LULC code field have the same data type. So I'm going to adjust it to short integer. There's no risk in this case because, as we saw, all the values are of the integer data type. I'm also going to make some small adjustments to the aliases to give them more meaningful descriptions. I'm now just taking a few seconds to review the properties of the output fields to ensure that the names, and especially the data types, are correct. Once I've imported the table into my geodatabase, I'm going to open up that table, examine the table to make sure that everything is in good order, and then go into the field properties to examine the field properties to ensure that everything is correct, specifically that the LULC code field is set to a short data type. Domains are stored at the Geodatabase level. To view a domain, I simply select any feature class or table in my Geodatabase, go up to the Data tab, and click on the Domains button. Right now I don't have any domains within this Geodatabase. I could potentially have hundreds of domains. I'm going to create a new domain by using the Table to Domain tool. The Table to Domain tool will import my table and set it up as a domain. Once again, it's imperative that I have my data type set up correctly. In this case, I know I want to apply the domain to the LULC field in my feature class, meaning that it has to be of the short integer data type. Setting my workspace to be the Geodatabase will load this table as a domain into my project Geodatabase. Once the Table to Domain tool is executed, I have a domain stored within my Geodatabase. I can confirm that by clicking on the Data tab and going to the Domains button. Now the domain is completely independent from the table at this stage. We can see that I've got a domain that looks exactly like my table because the table was the source information for it. It has the code and the description. Now I'm going to need to associate this domain with the attribute field in my feature class. Let's take a moment to have a look at the attribute table before we apply the domain. Remember, we really have a single attribute field that was added called land use land cover, which is the LULC numeric code for each and every land use land cover class for all of the polygons in the dataset. Now we're going to apply the domain to the attribute field. By going into the field properties and selecting the LULC field, I can scroll over and choose the domain. The only reason I can apply the LULC code domain to this particular field is because the LULC code domain and the land use land cover field are both of the short data types. If the data types did not match, I could not apply the domain. With the domain applied, you can see that my land use land cover field now displays the description instead of the coded value. I haven't changed the data type. This is still numerical data. It's just using the land use land cover description information as a virtual lookup. This allows me to go ahead and symbolize my data by, say, unique values, and it will display the land use land cover description, which is much more meaningful than those coded values. Just to show you that the data type hasn't changed for this LULC field, let's go back into the field properties. There we can see the LULC field is still of the short integer data type, but we do see that the domain is applied to it. As was mentioned before, the domain is entirely independent from the table. Although we use the table to create the domain, once the domain is created, we actually no longer need that table. Just to show you, I'm going to delete this table from the Geodatabase, go back into my Data tab, and click on Domains, and we can see that the domain is still there. So changes to the table don't affect the domain, and changes to the domain don't affect the table. Any edits, either through creating new features or modifying the attributes of existing ones, will now display a drop-down menu of the domain coded values. This will prevent anyone working on the project from entering an incorrect code or using a value that's outside of the established domain. Great for data integrity. In this tutorial, we showed you how to set up a domain and then apply that domain down to an individual attribute. Keep in mind, domains are stored at the Geodatabase level, then applied at the attribute field level. Domains are a great way to enforce attribute integrity, particularly when you have multiple users working on an individual project.